Letter 18. The Saturnalia Festival. The month is December, and the city is sweating. More than ever. License has been granted to public self-indulgence, and everywhere is a great din of preparations, just as if there was some real difference between a day of Saturnalia and a business day. But really there is not a bit of difference, so that I agree entirely with the one who said that what used to be the month of December has now become the entire year. If I had you here, Lucilius, I'd like to ask your opinion on what our behavior should be. Should we make no alteration at all to our daily routine? Or should we try not to appear at odds with the general custom, and so make our dinners more festive than usual, laying aside the toga even? For what never used to happen except in times of turmoil, some crisis of the state, we now do for pleasure. Because of the holiday, we alter our mode of dress. If I know you well, you would stand as an intermediary. You would not want us to be exactly like the crowd with the party hats, but neither would you want us to be completely different. And yet it may be during these days, one ought more than ever to take charge of one's own mind, ordering it to abstain from pleasures just when everyone else is indulging in them. For if it does not proceed, and is not enticed into those luxuries which lead to dissipation, it gives a very sure proof of its own strength. The latter is by far the bolder course, to remain cold sober when everyone else is drunk and vomiting. The former is more moderate, not to hold oneself apart or draw attention to oneself, while still not mingling in every respect. To do as others do, but not in the same manner. For one may celebrate the holiday without dissipation, but I am determined to test how firm your mind really is. I will therefore give you the same instructions that great men have given in the past. Set yourself a period of some days in which you will be content with very small amounts of food, and the cheapest kinds, and with coarse and uncomfortable clothing, and say to yourself, "Is this what I am afraid of?" A time when the mind is free of anxieties is the very time when it should prepare itself for adversity. Amid the favors of fortune, one should strengthen oneself against the onslaughts of misfortune. The soldier in time of peace goes for a run. He constructs a palisade, even when the enemy is not at hand, wearing himself out with extra effort, so as to be strong enough when effort is required. If you want someone not to be alarmed in a crisis, you must train him ahead of time. This was the practice of those who every month used to impose on themselves a time of poverty, amounting almost to destitution. The point of it was that if they had schooled themselves in deprivation, they would never be frightened by it. Don't suppose that I mean to recommend the dinners of Timon, the pauper's cells, and all the other things that self-indulgence plays at merely because it is bored with riches. Let your palate be a real one, your blanket really of burlap, your bread actually hard and coarse. Endure it for 3 days, or 4, or maybe more than that, so that it won't be a game but really a trial. Believe me, Lucilius, you will find it exciting to be fed full for a couple of pence, and you will understand that you can be free of anxiety even without the aid of fortune, for even adverse fortune will give you enough to supply your basic needs. Not that you therefore have reason to think you are doing something great. You will only be doing the same thing as many thousands of slaves and poor people. Think well of yourself only in that you are doing it without compulsion, and in that you will find it just as easy to endure this always as to try it occasionally. Let us try some practice bouts. Let us make poverty our companion, so that fortune cannot catch us unawares. We will be less anxious in prosperity if we know how trivial a thing it is to be poor. Even Epicurus, the expert on pleasure, used to have certain days on which he would barely satisfy his hunger, just to see whether or not that would do anything to reduce his complete and maximal pleasure, or if it did, by how much, and whether the difference would be enough to justify anyone in making a great effort over it. This is surely what he is saying in the letter he wrote to Polyaenus during the magistracy of Carinus. In fact, he boasts that he can be fed for less than 1 bronze coin, while Metrodorus, who has not yet progressed to the same point, requires a whole coin. Do you think a person can be full after this sort of meal? In fact, there is pleasure in it, and not a trivial and fleeting pleasure either, not the kind that keeps having to be refilled, but a stable and sure one. For although there is nothing delightful about water and barley gruel or a crust of bread, still there is a very great pleasure to be able to get pleasure even from these things, and so to have brought oneself to that state which no adverse fortune can undo. Meals in prison are more generous. The executioner is less stingy with those on death row. How great a spirit it is that submits by choice to a harsher penalty than is assigned to the worst of convicts. That's a way to rob fortune of its shafts. So make a start, dear Lucilius. Follow the custom of those men, and designate certain days when you part from your own prosperity and make scarcity your companion. Begin to have dealings with poverty. Remember this famous passage. Make bold, my guest, to rise above mere wealth, and shape yourself as well into a likeness worthy of God. No one is worthy of God unless he has risen above wealth. And yet I do not forbid you to possess wealth, Lucilius. I only seek to make you fearless in possessing it. And the only way to achieve that is if you convince yourself that you will be happy even without it. If you look at it as something that might disappear at any moment. But now let's begin rolling this letter up. And yet I hear you say, first pay what you owe me. I will refer you to Epicurus. Payment is to be made by him yet again. Anger beyond bounds begets insanity. You cannot help but know how true this is, since you have had both slaves and enemies. This emotion flares up against people of every station, as much from love as from hatred, and as much in our business dealings as amid jokes or games. Nor does it matter if the provocation is great or small. The only thing that makes any difference is the mind that is provoked. It is like a fire. What matters is not the size of the flame, but what is in its path. Where the material is solid, even the biggest blaze does not ignite it. Dry and combustible stuff, though, catches even a spark and makes of it an inferno. That's how it is, dear Lucilius. The outcome of great anger is madness. Hence we should avoid it at all cost, not to keep things in moderation, but to preserve our sanity. Farewell.